Hi everyone and welcome to the recap of round number 5, which again I managed to win, fortunately. We saw the last round, the French game, which I won. Today was a double round, so I apologize if my face looks quite tired after 2 rounds. It's always a bit tough, but I really want to review this game. And I played against a Spanish player, Garcia Blanco Omar. I was white, and let's have a look. I started with knight f3. Again, there was not much time to prepare. I only saw that my opponent plays the Grunfeld sometimes, which is here with d5, which is kind of forcing, and I didn't want to go into this. So that's why I started with knight f3, knight f6, c4. And even with this move order, he went into this so-called anti-Grunfeld. But here, obviously, d4 would transpose to the normal Grunfeld. But here I have some extra options, namely cd5, knight d5, and now this modern move which I played h4. White also has some other options. I think like queen b3 is a move, queen a4 check is an idea. So White has some extra options compared to the usual Grunfeld. But h4 nowadays is kind of like the most testing move, I would say. He played bishop g7. I should add that however Black reacts if he goes h6, for example, then very often in these main lines of the Grunfeld, now we have the typical Grunfeld with the inclusion of h4 and h6, then often in some forcing lines the pawn on h6 will hang when the bishop has to recapture something on c3 or on d4. I don't recall exactly what are the lines here, but there are a few variations where this is beneficial for White. And if you would stop myself from playing h5, if he would stop me from playing h5 by playing h5 himself, then the square on g5 is quite weak. And so I think here I have some options with I think even queen b3 is what I once checked. And if now knight b6, I have knight g5, and I have this outpost for the knight. And I guess something like g3 or something looks at least slightly better for White, or maybe e3 followed by d4. So that's why most players react to this by simply playing bishop g7, and I played h5. I think the main variation, or at least what it used to be, was e4, and now after knight c3, to play dc3, queen d1, king d1, and this line. I have to add here that there is also the line if White goes e4 right away, takes, queen d1, king d1, and here the main thing is that Black's bishop is still on f8. So I hope I'm not wrong, but I think Black usually wants to go f6, e5, and then often h5, bishop h6, also to exchange this pair of bishop, this bad bishop on f8 to our good one on c1. And I guess also Black has the option still to maybe go to c5 if he's allowed. So that's why people played e4 here and then took on c3 with the d-pawn, which is also playable, but I think Black is kind of fine with the knight d7 and then b6, bishop b7 last time I checked this. So h5, and I had a game here, I think it was 2 months ago in Switzerland, and my opponent also played knight c6. Obviously Black shouldn't castle, then some things will happen on the h-file. This typical motive is queen a4 and then queen h4. I guess this looks also pretty dangerous for Black here. So he went knight c6, and now I went g3. I also recalled this line during the game d4, and there's some crazy theory here, rook h4, intending to go e4. Some line like this, which apparently is fine for Black, but I didn't really want to go into these forcing things here. So I went bishop d4. If I'm not wrong, I think this was also my game. Maybe my opponent went bishop f5. I can't remember now. But my opponent today played bishop g4, h6. Now I have to react somewhat. I don't really want to take, because then I didn't gain anything with this h4, h5. I just lost 2 tempos basically. So I have to go h6. He played bishop f6, and I think the line which I checked was bishop takes c3. Now I think you can take with both pawns. I think I wanted to take with the d-pawn, and then to play this position as White, where I have the 2 bishops, but Black is fairly solid. I think you should go for some queen d7 long castle, but this was my preparation, if I'm not totally wrong now. It's been like 2 months since I checked this, so there might be some flaws in the variations. But he went bishop f6, bishop d2, and he played this pretty fast, which I was kind of shocked, because now he allowed this sequence take and knight h2, simply giving up this very important light squared bishop. But here it was surprisingly tough for me to come up with something, because at first it just looks great for white with this bishop, and also you could simply take and argue that black's king is very weak and his pawn structure is broken. But my problem is the bishop on c1 is also horrible, and I cannot really get out. And in meanwhile, I thought black has this plan rook d5, rook h5, queen h3, and I didn't really see how to parry all of that. And black's king is fairly safe, at least for the moment, so I did not really like how this looked. I briefly checked, the engine said that d3 is strong, and after knight d4 simply rook e1, and then bishop e3 is to come, and white is slightly better. Still, in the game I thought black has some ideas like g5, maybe rook g8, rook g6, rook h6, but I guess I'm just too fast on the king side here, something like bishop e3 and maybe rook c1. So that would have been better than what I played. I played e3 and went into this endgame knowing that now the pawn on h6 is not a strength, but a weakness, and it will fall. But I hoped that I will get some compensation along the lines with my good bishop on g2, which I then immediately gave up, because now in the endgame at least I'm not getting mated, and I thought that his pawn structure is really a long-term weakness. I went b4. I guess b3 is more logical. My thinking was that in the following lines, what happened in the game is that at some point I could have the option to go b5, especially if I doubled rooks. Then b5 is an option, and then pawn on c7 is pinned, so he cannot take on b5. For example, in a line like this, I don't know, let's say black does nothing, king b7, and now I would have b5 with pressure on the c file. So that was the point of b4, but probably b3 would have been better, simply not putting the pawn on the opponent's bishop square. And I also here, at least I have ideas with the rook also swinging on the 4th rank, maybe to a4 and hitting this pawn on a7. So I was not sure during the game, but I just went b4 after all. He took bishop b2, and here I was very shocked that he played bishop g7, simply giving me this very pleasant endgame. Now I'm not the pawn down anymore, and still his pawn structure is at least slightly worse than mine. In the game I thought he should simply go something like king b7, and he can always protect the pawn on c6 with rook d6. And I thought I shouldn't be worse here, but I'm definitely not better. Black is a pawn up, and my compensation is, yeah, nothing that special. I guess something like rook c2, but even there he could go into this rook endgame, and now he, now he at least saved the pawn on c6. But he went bishop g7 into this rook endgame, and I guess he just thought it's a draw, and it is very drawish, but he has to be quite careful here. And his problem is also the rook on g7 is now quite misplaced, and as we will see, it will be quite tough for him to get it out. He played e5 with the idea of f5 and rook d7, and that's why I played rook f6 here, stopping the rook on g7 from getting out. He has to exchange my rook here, simply too strong on f6. And here I thought for some time, but rook c1 check simply seemed like the best try. The position is a draw, but black still has to be quite careful with the rook on g7, and I have this potential outside passer here. d4 was another thing I considered, but I thought he could even take, and his pawn structure is a bit ugly, but black is very solid. Now f5 will come, and I thought it would be quite a simple draw. Also f5 I thought would be possible, and I have the better side of the draw here, but I thought what I had in the game is a better try. I played rook c1 check, and here he made a slight inaccuracy, king b7, which I cannot really blame him for it. I think I would have played the same. king d7 would be better. And now after b5, which also happened in the game, and now rook g8. And if rook c6, probably what he missed, that now there's rook b8, a4, and rook b6, very important. Because if I get rook a6, let's say black does something like h5, now rook a6, rook b7, and now his rook is passive, and even this might be a draw, but I can always try a bit, maybe activate my king, and okay, if it reaches d5, then it's already a different story. But he has rook b6, and then yeah, then it's nothing special. I could also try a4, but this pawn endgame I did not have the time to check it. The engine said it's a draw, so I guess that should be correct. I mean, black has this pawn after all. He can simply make the wall here, I don't know, h5, g5, f5, and yeah, it does look like a draw after all. He played king b7, b5, and now he was already kind of in a tough spot because rook c6 is simply coming, and his pieces could get quite passive. f5 is also logical, and after rook c6, rook d7, he could have done that, but I simply would have played a4, and it's quite unpleasant for black because he's simply so passive and he cannot really do anything. I mean, he could push d5 trying to get d4 to get rid of this weakness, but in the game I thought I could even go d4 myself, and then he has this next weakness here. So this endgame I thought it's quite dangerous for black already. He went king b6, which is a more forcing way. Rook c6, king b5, rook d6. And still he has quite some issues to solve. Even this position is still a draw, but it's getting narrower and narrower for him. Because I'm threatening rook d7, again, kind of boxing in this rook on g7, and also rook d5 is an immediate threat. He went a5, not caring about the pawn on e5, but arguing that this pawn on a2 will be his next victim with the king to come in, but he did not manage to win it. Rook d5, king b4, rook e5, and now f5. I should add, I saw that the engine said that king b4 right away is more accurate. Good question, why? I guess that now after rook d5, the same, now black has f6, and he doesn't lose a pawn, and the pawn on a2 is still a weakness. And if rook d7, a5 now should be a draw again. It looks a bit tricky for black because his rook is still tied down. And after something like king g2, king a3, I always keep an eye on this pawn on a5 too. So even this is definitely suffering for black. He went a5, and now I simply picked up this pawn, f5. Now finally his rook is getting in. So he gave the pawn on purpose simply to get some active counterplay. But here I finally started to play well. I think there's only one winning plan here, because you might think that white should start pushing his own passer, but this pawn is not really going anywhere, and I guess black could. What did I think? I think rook c7 and then rook c2, and after something like d5. And I don't think this pawn is going anywhere, and the pawn on a2 could definitely fall at some point. Or I guess the engine likes rook d7 better. Immediately stopping the pawn and then going a4, king a3. So there even could be some danger for me if I'm really careless. But a3 check, which I played, is quite strong, I believe. Obviously cannot take, because then I'm simply a pawn up, and his king is still cut off. So this endgame should be winning. He has to keep these two pawns in the game to have some chances of counterplay, of creating this outside passer, of winning the pawn on a3. And now rook c5. That was my whole plan behind a3. I want to get this formation with the rook being on c3, and then to push d4, because then black has a very hard time to getting to this pawn on a3 or winning it. Rook b7, rook c3, and what's important is that these, at least I thought that rook b3 takes, that now d4 and these endgames should always be winning. If he takes, then d5, I'm getting a queen. I'm faster than black. And if king c4, I thought that I'm slowly winning. I think king f1, king e, or maybe I should start with king g2, and then I can probably slowly get in. Even this is not clear now that I look at it. Maybe g5, king f3, h5, but I felt it should be winning with a pawn up, and he can never go for this a3 pawn because my passer on d4 will always go through. So I thought this never really works for black, but he found the best way to keep on playing, which is bringing the king back and now wanting to play a4 and then rook b3. Because then my rook is a bit in trouble here, and I can never really take on b3 because then the black's pawn will go through. I played king f1, and here I was lucky to be right in time to answer rook b3 with king d2 here. And again, these endgames should never work for black. I'm simply a pawn up. And it turns out that this is just winning for me. He tried g5. I guess what he missed was that after rook b2 check, obviously rook c2 doesn't do much because then simply rook b3. But I think what he missed was that after king c1, rook f2, now d5, and he cannot really stop this pawn from queening, at least from what I've seen, because the rook is just completely cut off. If he gives check, then king d2, here king e1, and I don't know where the rook goes, but I'm simply going d6, d7, d8, and I thought king a6, for example. Here I even have rook c8, and I'm winning. So that was my calculation. Let me know if I missed anything. But yeah, that's just the raw thoughts. He went g5, and now I still had to be careful because of some pawn endgames. For example, king c2 I think would be a huge blunder, because then he can take, go h5, and now white is winning again. What was the endgame? I thought rook c, yeah, exactly, king c2, h5, and now, for example, take, and now h4, and even if I'm how many pawns am I up? 2 pawns up, but black is simply winning this pawn. So I still had to be careful here. King c2 would be a mistake. But g5 gave me the option to play rook c5 check and simply pick up the pawn on f5. I thought that if he would go h5 with the same idea, to go g5 next. Now I don't have rook c5, rook f5, because the pawn is still protected. But after h5, I thought I could go f4 now. And now he will never be able to create a passer here. Maybe now he has some counterplay with rook g2, but yeah, I mean, I wasn't sure entirely what I would go for, but I'm sure there should be a win somewhere as well here. He went g5, rook c5, and this endgame, I was quite lucky that it was just winning, but I still had to be careful. I went into this, I also, during the game, I calculated f3, but it simply seemed too deep. But I just checked what the engine says, and f3 is the best move. The idea is just that, okay, now I'm kind of, my idea is to play g4, and then this pawn on h7 is backwards. And if now h5, rook c5, and I get an even better version than the game, because now these pawns are just all falling. So f3 apparently is even better, but as far as I could tell, everything was winning, even what I had in the game. Take, rook g5, rook a2, and here he played rook a2. I thought the better try would be rook f3. And here I calculated this, h4, king c4, and if I'm in time to stop this pawn and consolidate, then I thought I should be winning, but it's actually not that simple. After h3, at least what I calculated from here, so it was already quite far, about 10 moves. I thought about king d3 only, and after h2, rook h5, rook g2, I thought that this should be winning. But this actually turns out to be a draw, because black is in time to create counterplay with the king if he comes over here. And I never have ideas with king e5, because then there's always rook g5 check. Very important idea. But it turns out that rook e6 check is the only winning move here. And here in the same line, now I have a better version. The king is on the 7th rank, and it's just in time for me that white is fast enough here. So I hope that I would have seen that, otherwise it would be quite painful. But anyway, he played rook a2, and then it was quite simple. I simply picked up the pawn on h7. I also thought about e4 here. Then I go rook h6 check and take on h7. But then I was always scared that my pawns will be a bit loose here, and if one of those pawns drop off, then it could very well be a draw. So yeah, I had to be careful here. But rook h7 was good, and I think the only important thing was that after king d5, if he wants to activate his king, then I'm always going rook e7. At least that was my idea during the game. And then I will play rook e5 check next, and I thought it should be a simple win. He played rook a1, and now there's not much he can do. If he waits, I'm simply pushing this pawn, and at some point he has to bring the rook, and then I'm always winning this pawn here, like in the game. And this endgame is simply winning. I'm bringing the king, and 2 pawns and rook against rook is basically always a win. So yeah, I think it was quite an interesting endgame. I have to admit it was a bit lucky. I think here was kind of the critical moment. I shouldn't go into this endgame. It just was quite dry, and if he wouldn't have given up this pawn by playing, for example, king b7, I'm not sure I would have won this game. So I think d3 would be a much better continuation here. So yeah, thank you for watching this recap. I hope it will also bring me luck tomorrow, just like the recap in the morning brought it. And I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.